On this episode of Finally a Decent Podcast, I've invited a guest to speak about the topsy turvy world of employment, his concerns about too many college and university educational institutions, and the remedy of self employment through Down Home Initiative. Over the fair number of years I have known you, Jeff Swanson, I have seen you as a pastor to many, a counselor, a mentor, a patriot, a father and a parent of 8 young people that you and your dedicated wife, Kelly, have homeschooled, a Christian activist as well as a key staff person of the popular Country Dairy, and also, I might add, a treasured board member of our American Decency Association. So, welcome, Jeff Swanson.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
I primarily invited you to speak with me on three main topics. Number one, Jeff, how have you seen God calling you and bringing you into the wide calling He has given you? In other words, why are you engaged in such a wide number of different aspects and outreaches?
Sure. I guess it's really just how God has made me. I have always been involved in a lot of stuff. If you ask my wife, she'll affirm that. So just a wide variety of interests and things that I am uh, always pursuing. Um, I, so even the work that I've done, I've always done like these weird jobs where I've always kind of made my own way in those work situations in employment. And again, God was just equipping me for being, even when I was younger, being somebody that can adapt very quickly to a new situation and shift from one point to another pretty rapidly and not lose track of either of those. Although as I get older, it seems to be harder sometimes, and things fall through the cracks sometimes. But by and large, that's the way God has made me. So and that has worked well in my life. So
Yeah, Jeff, I know that what you stand about what? It seems like you get taller every time I see you, but you're probably at least 6'5", aren't you? 6'7"?
yeah,
You're
I'm
six
6'5".
five,
Yeah.
and you are also a football player.
I was a football player, yeah, in high school. I had been drafted to go to Taylor University and play on the football team there, but I ended up not. I got saved right before I went to college, about 9 months before I ended up in college, and I was trying to figure out how to be a Christian and be a football player, and I didn't really have anybody to show me how those two could go together because the only thing that I could the way I used to play football when I was in high school was more of a evolutionist mindset. And I would tell myself the survival of the fittest, and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to be the fittest. And I couldn't reconcile that together with being a Christian now, and how do I be good at football and still be a Christian without being hateful and really wanting to take somebody's head off.
Jeff, that's an amazing story. And honestly, having played football myself in high school, I wasn't a Christian at the time, but the thought of because I love football so much, and I'm sure you did too, for you to catch the vision of being taking up your cross and following Him and saying no to football, you must have had a strong salvation experience.
Yeah, yes, yeah. It was, yeah. The Lord worked on me for many years, but especially like the last year and a half before coming to faith, He was very, very much working on me and transforming me into somebody who had conviction. I guess is probably the way to put it. I wouldn't have said that maybe back then. Wouldn't have known how to put that, but yeah, want your faith to be genuine. I think is how, and I knew that it had to be genuine, otherwise I didn't have faith. So
Jeff, so along the way back, you came out of Indiana or Illinois, didn't you?
Yeah, I was born in Wisconsin, and then lived from the time I was 10 on through college in Indiana. Yeah.
And somewhere along the way, because you are heavily involved, we'll get into a little bit that later, with Country Dairy. And I know that you were in northern Michigan as well, in some kind of a farming capability. Or did you have any farming background back in your growing up years?
Yeah, and in Indiana, if you grew up in rural Indiana, especially back in the 70s and 80s, farming was it. And so everybody worked on farms. All the young kids worked on farms. So I started picking asparagus when we moved down to Indiana when I was around 10 years old, and just was in agriculture, in some degree or another throughout that whole time. So
In a
when I
way,
was in
I'm
high
kind of
school, actually, when I was in high school, I started working on a hog farm, and did that as well, and did some planting and harvesting of corn and those types of things on that farm as well.
even from my own understanding, trying to put all together about how you are multifaceted and capable of laboring on a different fronts. You probably had quite a bit of experience with farm animals and farm equipment, and probably using them and maybe even repairing them. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, when you're on a farm, you have to make things work and adapt things as best as you can. Be creative. Animals need to be fed, chores need to be done, tractors need to be driven, snow needs to be plowed. So, whenever you're working in situations like that, that's the you just have to make it work.
It somewhat toughens you up, I would have to think.
Yeah, yeah, probably to a degree, and you become adaptable to things. So yeah, yeah,
A good work ethic,
yes, yep.
and
My
maybe
dad,
even that
dad,
took some
yeah, my
overtime.
dad helped instill that work ethic in me. My mom and dad both really helped to instill a work ethic in me. There are people that work a lot harder than I do, and there's a lot of people that work a lot less hard than I do. So,
Well, as we're going to be working our way into parenting, it helps to if you don't know how to do something, it's awful hard to pass it along to somebody else. But when you know how to do some of these hands-on things and have a work ethic, you're more able to show and pass on. And I think that's part of where we're going in part with this. So I want to find out when did you meet your wife to be, Kelly?
yeah, we met when I was a freshman in college at Taylor University, and she was a senior just graduating. And so we met about halfway through, right after the first semester, and we dated for about 4 months or so, and then I asked her to marry me. So we got married in the beginning of on September 1st, 1990, and uh, I was a little bit concerned about her graduating and going back to Grand Rapids, and figured I would probably stand the chance of losing her, so I better catch hold of her.
Make haste.
That's right.
So you, so you're
So
like 35 years into your marriage.
yes, yep,
Yeah,
yep.
that's not
35
too
years in a
bad.
marriage. No, no, not too bad. No, it's wonderful. So
Amen. So then along the way, you became a pastor. The church that you pastor, the King Presbyterian, the Christ the King Presbyterian Church in Shelby, Michigan, under your leadership has seemingly always had a ton of homeschooled young people. I know that because we brought a couple of different speakers over to your church, and you have readily brought them into your church. I'm talking about people like Phil Haney, for example, Jim Simpson, and I don't think we brought Curtis Bowers over, but we brought others as well. Um, another one I'm trying to think of. It's maybe you can help me with that. Um, yeah. Anyway, that gives us a good start. But anyway, so this whole matter of homeschooled young people, when we would bring people like Phil Haney in, for example, you would allow him to present and gave a great opportunity for the young people. And there were a number of young adolescents that just ate. Kamal Salim was also brought there, and those young people were trained to ask good questions. Um, and I'm sure you remember many of those opportunities. But how has God fostered the whole matter of homeschooling, homeschooling in your own family, and the outreach that extends to families in the area that bring in their children as homeschool parents? Where'd that
Sure.
all come from?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my wife and I both went to public school. So, and her father was a public school teacher. He worked as a shop teacher for 35 years in basically the same classroom. And, really he loved teaching. I went to Taylor to be a teacher and started off as a history and geography teacher, and did a year of that out in New Mexico. But after during that year that I was in New Mexico, I even in college I could see that eventually um, this might not be the path that I'm going to be able to take, because um, I had different ideas about things having to do with government and the Constitution, and I, I just haven't been, especially since I got saved, one to just go along with the flow, and that's both good and bad. um, so yeah, when I was in New Mexico, I could see things, divisions starting to happen because of some of those convictions. Like, I didn't want to become a part of the teacher union, because I didn't think that the teachers unions were actually all that good. They weren't merit based. They weren't. They tried to control decisions that were made that weren't necessarily good. I think they can serve as a good role to a degree, but they had developed into a not such a good role. So I was opposed to that. I also had a number of different conversations with fellow teachers regarding American history and the Constitution and the First Amendment rights, especially being able to talk about religion. So I was teaching Christianity in the classroom, not in a sense where I was driving it down people's throat, but just teaching basic things about Christianity and religion and other religions as well, and just showing maybe like logical reasons why Christianity was correct, and being confronted by another teacher regarding that, who was a Baha'i, and me and him having a conversation. He thought separation of church and state. I asked him where it was found in the Constitution. Could he show me? He was a U.S. history teacher, by the way, and he could not show me in the Constitution where that was, and he kept saying, "Well, I know it's in here somewhere." Um, and so we were bantering back and forth, and regarding that. So it, situations like that. And I asked him if he was Baha'i, and asked him if he ever talked about his Baha'i faith in class, and he said yes, and so that was acceptable for him to do that with Baha'i, but not Christianity in the classroom. And so I started seeing the handwriting on the wall, and I came home to Kelly one day and I said, well, in Matthew 6, where Jesus says, do not worry about what you will eat, or what clothes you'll put on, or anything like that in the Sermon on the Mount. And she said, yes. And I said, I just want to prepare you that someday I will likely be fired from my job because I'm I'm standing for Christ. So anyway, that ended up not turning into that because we ended up moving back to Michigan, and I took a job at Cedar Bend Farm, and that was a living history farm up in northern Michigan, and I did that for 10 years before moving down here to Shelby. So, um, yeah, I don't know. I'm not even sure I answered your question.
Oh, you definitely did. You definitely did. Now, where was Kelly in all of that as well? Was she teaching too when you were teaching, or what was her situation?
No, no, she as soon as we had our first child, she's been working heartily at home, and has found that as a very rewarding priority. And we've both had that as a priority. Never even really gave it a second thought. Both of us had moms that stayed home, and took care of the house, and so we had that background. I think that was helpful, and so she's always served the family and the household. So yeah, never even gave it a second thought. And the same thing kind of started happening
Mhm.
with our young children, and that's how we ended up getting into homeschooling. We were both, thinking how watching. You could watch the kids standing out there, a kindergarten kid standing out there at the bus stop, waiting for the bus to come, and his parents sending him away on that bus, and we just thought that just looks crazy. How could you do that? And so this is in the early '90s when we first started having children, and it just seemed so odd to be able to send your child away to somebody else to be trained, indoctrinated, and whatever you want to say, um, to that. So when it came time for schooling, I don't think we ever even hardly thought about the fact that we were not going to send our kids to public school. We just were going to homeschool from the get go. I mean, that was just I'm not exactly sure where that came from. But then as we started doing that, we started getting into um, understanding why we thought that way, and some of that. And some Doug Wilson's books were helpful regarding that. He was writing on those topics in the late 80s to through the 90s on homeschooling and schooling in general, and coming to some of those convictions and stuff. So we've always thought, if God's given you children and He's given you the ability to read, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to teach your own children.
So Jeff, you were in you moved down from Upper Michigan down to the Shelby area. And what year would that have been?
Yeah, so we moved down to Shelby. We're in Ferry Township between Shelby and Hesperia, and we moved down here in 2004. So from
2004 and
1994 until 2004, I managed the farm up in Mansalona.
up in Manslona. So when you came down to Shelby, there already was a church that was established that was quite strong for homeschooled children. Talk about that a little bit. You weren't initially the pastor there, but talk about that church there and some of the what you saw there initially in terms of the collection of homeschooling families.
Sure. Yeah, so we ended up moving down here um, for a couple reasons. One, we were looking at being up north, and really being dissatisfied with a lot of the church churches up in northern Michigan, and just being able to, a little bit frustrated trying to find a good, solid, reformed church up there. And there just wasn't. And so we were interested in, and we were pursuing Reformed theology. And for a variety of different reasons. That's probably a different topic. um, so that was one of the frustrations, and the Christian community very, very watered down up there. And so that was just a little bit of a frustration. And so we became familiar with the pastor that was pastoring Christ King Church down here. And we met through some mutual friends. And so we started visiting down here, became good friends. And then the guy that I was working for was getting older. He was in his mid 70s. And he was thinking, he needed to do something with that farm. The farm had an association with Spring Arbor University, and Spring Arbor University had sent all their students, freshman students, to Cedar Bend Farm for a 4-day weekend, and we put them through like a little bit of a boot camp. So and he had originally thought we would be able to get an outpost campus there at Cedar Bend Farm and associate more with Spring Arbor, and they would take over basically the running of the farm and the leadership of the farm, and then I would work for Spring Arbor University. That ended up not happening, and so for a couple different reasons. So then he really figured, I'm in my mid 70s, I got to do something with this farm. I don't want it to be a burden on my wife if I'm to pass away or something like that. And so he decided to sell the farm, and I didn't have the money to be able to pay for that farm. So we decided, and then he ended up selling it to some folks that didn't need me to be there as well. They were going to do basically my job, and they were very kind and great people, but they were going to do what I've been doing, so which makes sense. So then I lost both our house and our job on this basically the same day. Although the family that I'd been working for those 10 years are just dear friends even yet to today. And his Harold's wife is still alive, and she's really my wife's best friend. And she's in her mid 90s now. And so it was nothing, no problem on any of that end. It was just, what do I do? And so there's no bitterness or anything like that. So we thought, let's move to where we know there's a good church. So that was number one priority, is to be a part of a worshiping community. So we had become friends with the pastor, Mark Dewey, here at Christ the King Church. And so we had been visiting. We knew the people, so that was just a logical thing to move down to this area and become a part of that church plant. And so that's what we did. And so we came down, looked for land in the spring of 2004, a house, land, something that we could move to, and then bought a house and made the move on July 4th, 2004. We didn't go to fireworks that night.
Yeah, that was quite a, I knew that. What was the name of the pastor again?
Mark Dewey.
Mark Dewey. Yep, I knew met Mark Dewey, and he was a former relief pitcher in the big leagues, I think for the San Francisco Giants. And I think he also did a major protest there where he wasn't going to wear a LGBT cap or something, and he was in the newspapers all over the country. So he was quite a staunch individual himself at that time. So you were, I'm sure, quite a combination together. But so along the way, though, he ended up moving back into I think into the athlete realm. I think he was like you go from there, and then you took over. You were installed as a pastor shortly thereafter. What year was that have been?
So we moved in 2004, and then I filled pulpit. I had gone to seminary, so part of being part of Spring Arbor University is they wanted me to get a master's degree. So I went to seminary and got a master's degree in historical theology, believing that I liked history and I loved theology, so those two would go together. So I ended up getting a MA in the seminary, in Grand Rapids Theological Seminary. Um, and then, then I started filling pulpit here and there, beginning in 2003, really, when I was still a student in seminary. So I had filled pulpit um, off and on in different churches, and then started doing that as well in our church in 2006. And then we had a crisis in our church with one of the we were a part of a different denomination before that, and that went south. And so Mark ended up stepping down from the pulpit for a time, and that's what led to me to step in and start doing that. He took a year and said, "I'm going to from the fall of or maybe midsummer, late summer of 2006," and he said he was going to take a year to really decide whether he was called into the pastorate or not. And so he did that, and through that year, he came to the conclusion that I'm just not really equipped to be a pastor in this position. Um, we could dispute that. I thought that he was, but that's the conviction that he had come to, and great evangelist, and could really preach the word well. But I think that whole problem with the denomination was, that was a tough deal. It was very, very hard. And so through that year, I had filled in here and there in that 2006 and 7. And then so in 2007, our session put me on as the interim pastor. And then over that next year, uh, of me pastoring the church there in the fall of 2008, late summer 2008, they decided to call me as the pastor. I went through ordination examinations in 2008, and have been the full-time pastor there ever since. So that's 2007, 2008 is when I really stepped into the pulpit here at Christ the King Presbyterian.
So in the experience of scrambling around, whether, trying to find your way in terms of farming and your position there, nonetheless, you were still working in farming equipment and animals and chores and working hard. And I know that the purchase of your property, you had a country home, and you also had animals there as well. And so your children were growing up in the midst of country living, farmland, and chores and hard work and watching their dad. And I also know that one of the times that you invited Janet and I to come over and have dinner with you guys. And so we invited us over. We came over and had dinner, and then we got to be able to part of your devotions as a family that evening there in your living room. And so that was a wonderful opportunity for us to see your all your family in action, because you started and you spoke a bit, you turned to the scripture, opened the Bible up, and they all had the Bible, and they read scripture themselves, and then you went around, you had questions for all of your kids, and they readily answered questions. You tailored it for their age level and so forth, and it was very clear you had a wonderful unity in your family. Not to say that you didn't have, I'm sure, the stresses that every family does have, but you certainly were growing spiritually and in working together and so forth. And those years go by so very, very quickly. And before you know it, your kids are 10, 11, 12, 15, 17, and 18 and so forth, and then beyond. And now we're at a point in your life where you and I was at our board meeting recently. I asked you the question, how many of your kids are now 20 and older? And you answered me six. And four of them are young men. And four of them are young men. And so one of my curiosities, Jeff, and one of the reasons why I wanted you to be with me in this podcast is that we're really living in a day in our culture of joblessness, and young men and women, but I'm particularly centering on young men this time around, that they scrambling around for jobs and for and whether to go to college or not to go to college. And there's bad reports about the university and colleges in the sense that they go ahead and they get a degree and then they can't find a job in the degree that they got. That's one issue. Another issue is we also hear that there's a number of kids that come out of church families, Christian families, that they're indoctrinated and they lose their way. And if they weren't saved, and even if they, I mean, it's not, you can't lose your salvation, but they lose their way. And I know you saw all those kinds of things. And so as your young men were reaching the age, maybe starting with your oldest, um, talk about that, about how it is that you ended up now with having four young men that all are self-employed. Um, so give us a sense of that, starting with your oldest and the struggles. I mean, were there struggles of like whether to go to college, not to go to college? How did that unfold where each one individually decided not to go to college, but rather to, to just to find their way?
Hmm. Yeah, we never discouraged them from going to college. We never encouraged them from going to college. So that it was never in, and even when I was growing up, it was never something that you must go to college. I never had that, and from my parents, they were completely supportive when I did decide to go to college when I was 20. But and we raised our kids the same way. We never either way. But one of the things that we did talk about was, you know, why would you need to go to college? There's some degrees that you might need to go to college for. If you're going to be, a brain surgeon, something along those lines, you might need to go to college. You'll have to go to college in order to get certified and all of that. So there are degrees that you need to go to school for, but a lot of them you do not need to go to school for. A lot of work and supporting your family, and so we really stressed, family and just doing the work that you needed to do in order to support your family. That's really what I have done over the years, and I think my children saw that. When I first started at Country Dairy, I got hired to do tours, but I also needed to make more money than that, so I also milked cows in the morning, and so I would get up at 3 a.m. and be getting it and get everything set up in order to start milking cows at 4 a.m. And that just became part of my life. It was not an easy part, and we would do family devotions at the supper table, and sometimes I would be so tired that I would fall asleep while we're doing the devotion. So, but I would be up at 3 a.m., do the milking and chores, and then start tours at 9 o'clock and go until 3 or 4 in the afternoon, until the day was done, and then home, eat supper, and back, and then to bed. Home, devotions, eat supper, and to bed. And sometimes I would fall asleep at the table because it was taxing. So when I became pastor of the church, that's when I stopped the milking schedule. So that was good. My family still refers to those as the milking years. But my oldest son, grew up in that, and we didn't have, it wasn't always easy. We had our differences and so forth, but I think he witnessed that same type of mentality, and he witnessed the desire to have family. So he got married when he was 20, in 2013, and
Did he have a job at that time? Did
yes,
he have a job at that?
he was actually working
And
at Country
what
Dairy.
working at Country Dairy?
Yep, working at Country Dairy and making cheese and ice cream and doing some of those specialty products, butter. So he did that for a number of years after they got married, and so just you got to be a hard worker and work hard and support your family, and so that's what he did. And but he also was very interested in story. Always has been fascinated with stories and stories of people's lives, how the story of Scripture, the story of how God is working things together in this world, how He's tied things together with His Word, and things like that. But also like Lord of the Rings and the Christian message, the Christian themes that are really deeply embedded in books like the Lord of the Rings. So those types of stories have always fascinated him, and so he got into filmmaking, writing, and filmmaking early on, even before he got married, and so he eventually was able to step away from Country Dairy and form his own film company. And he, as part of that, he also has a YouTube channel, and puts out content with his YouTube channel, and has I think if I remember right, around 400,000 subscribers. So he makes part of his income from YouTube, and he also has a film company that he's working on, and does video editing for other people. So he's kind of a self-contracted person as far as being able to put together a living for his family that way. So
Jeff, that's amazing. That's really entrepreneurial. Who was mentoring him? Was he just reading how to do it, or how did he get mentored in that? In short,
yeah, he was just really he was pursuing what he just had a passion for. I think and he's always loved the like I said, the story. He's loved filmmaking and how those things go together, and he pursued that love, and that's what he wanted to do. So I don't know that he was really mentored by anybody in particular regarding that. I would put I would try and help put people together with him. So we had like a filmmaker do some video here at Country Dairy for some of the things that we do here, and I would tie him in, those two guys together, and so they did some work together a little bit with some of that, and he was very helpful. And we went to the San Antonio Christian Film Festival a couple years back in 2012, 13. So trying to give him opportunity to make some of those connections, which he did and took advantage of, but he didn't really,
that's
go to
that's
school for it.
fantastic. He was really entrepreneurial,
Yeah,
visionary, entrepreneurial, hardworking. So and it would sound like he's making a fairly good living, or maybe
he
even a
is.
very good living.
Yes.
That's
Yep.
amazing.
Yep.
And so, what year what did you say that he went off on his own then? How many years ago?
From our household, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he got married in 2003, and that's when he started his own household. And a year later, they had our first grandbaby and their first child. And so she's yeah, getting up there, 11 years old. Yeah.
So he's
So
been on his own for in terms of even breaking away from Country Dairy.
yeah, he boy, I don't remember off the top of my head, but probably stopped working for Country Dairy in around 2017. I'm thinking
Mhm.
2018, something like that.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. So your next son of the four that's
Yeah,
working
yeah.
independently.
So Elisha is the second son, and he had a love for flying and wanted to really get his pilot's license. So he was working at Country Dairy too. All my children started working at Country Dairy in their teens, 16, 15, 16, 17, in that range. And so uh, Elisha worked and saved up his money to begin working on his pilot's license, and ended up getting his pilot's license when he was about 16. And he got his pilot's license before he actually got his driver's license. So, and really, really loved that, and did some flying over the years. And then around the time that he was 18, he decided to go to the Oh, I can't think of the name of it. The School of Mission Aviation Technology over in Ionia, SMAT. So he spent a year over there and learned how to became a licensed airplane mechanic. Worked in that field for a little while. He was distressed by a lot of immorality that he saw with fellow workers. Struggled with that a bit. Pornography was part of that, not in his life, but that being a part of that culture. So he just tried to really avoid any of that. He had just gotten married as well right after he graduated from SMAT. Didn't want to get sucked into that whole lifestyle. So he ended up working for a concrete company and learning that trade. Went back to mechanics, but more with auto mechanics for a time, and then decided probably about 2 years ago now to start his own concrete company. And so he's Swanson Concrete, and he's making doing concrete work around the area here. And again, just desiring to work hard and by the sweat of your brow, make a living.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And then your third son.
Third son Ezra is has always loved wood, and so we always thought he was going to probably be a woodworker of some sort. And so he inherited Kelly, my wife's father's wood shop, and was able to. We've set up a wood shop in our pole barn, and he started working on things when he was in his early teens, and he'd bring in boxes and little cabinets that he would make, and he'd bring those in to show us, and it was like, wow, you're very talented. He would got into doing hand cut dovetails, and just loved the craft of it, the skill of it, and just really was skilled in those ways. Loved the fine tuning of things, the fine carpentry aspect of it, and so he's doing custom woodworking now, and some furniture and bookshelves and things like that. But he also has a construction company of his own as well, and so he is working construction, just building trades as well. So he does a little bit of.
Is he on his is he on his own?
Yes.
Does he have others? Yes, he's on. And where's he located in your area?
Yep, he's also in the area. Yeah, all of our children still go to our church and live right in the area here. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then my fourth son, Simeon, he is 20, and he has worked in construction for the last couple, probably 3 years in construction. I worked for another company for a year and a half, and then about a year ago he went out on his own as well. So, and my son-in-law has done the same thing, and worked in the same company that Simeon worked for. Ezra also worked for the same company, and so they got some experience there, and then have gone out on their own. There's enough work in the area to be able to justify having their own companies. So.
Yeah, that's a remarkable overview of your children there, and Jeff. I know that at the same time you would say that it is as wonderful as the picture looks. It certainly does not mean that there hasn't been the trials and tribulations that are common to all of us. Is that fair to say? I mean, it wasn't just like they had a plan and they just opened up and they jumped into it. Um, Tell a little bit about that side of it, if you would as well.
Sure. Yeah. Let me say this before uh, going going to that. So we have a number of young guys in our congregation, through the inspiration of another entrepreneurial guy who comes out of northern Minnesota, up in Duluth, in this very rural area as well. who inspired them to really, you can do this business on your own. And but he also warned them about joining together into one company, because I think this group of about 8 guys in our congregation were thinking along those lines. And so they listened to him and they all formed their own companies, but now they have a crew. So anytime they need help to build something bigger, they got a whole crew available. Or if Elisha's going to pour concrete walls today and he needs 8 guys, he's got a crew available to him. But otherwise, they do work on their own. We have a couple of those guys have their general contractor's license, so they can bid out jobs and will send work to others of the group as well, and kind of organize things. So, yeah. So as far as sunshine and roses, things have not always been smooth sailing. We're a family. We've had sins that we need to struggle with each other, and forgive each other of, and we have disagreements. I have early on in our moving down here, I was a little frustrated with moving from a job that I thought I was going to really go through and retire from, up north. And so I was dealing with a lot of those types of emotions myself. So I wasn't necessarily, for a couple of years there, a really great dad, because I was struggling through some of those things as well. So I would lose my patience with them when chores weren't done, and I got to go milk cows at 3:00 in the morning, and you can't milk our one cow here, kind of thing. So we had our struggles, and so it's repenting to each other, confessing our sins to one another, even as a dad confessing my sins to our children and letting them know that I'm not perfect. You're not perfect, I'm not perfect. And being able to forgive one another and ask our children to forgive us has been, I think, real important. And I think that's been a model in our life, thankfully. And again, not always perfectly, but that's the trajectory that we're shooting and aiming towards. And we need to have that right trajectory that we're on, pointing towards Christ.
That's fantastic. Now, I think that's a real picture your family in a rural setting, and there's a lot of people that don't live in rural settings that are just seem to be stuck. They're maybe in apartments or maybe in close context of living next and close to other people, and it doesn't seem like there's many job availabilities, but there might be job abilities. It might be at a Meijer, it might be at a Walmart, it might be at a car wash place or whatever. Um, it would seem to me that, like, if perhaps you were in a city with your young people, um, you would have counsel for them that would be similar to what you've given in the country. Um, and I would just like to have you be speaking into those that are in a different context in terms of counsel for them, and then speak as a pastor as well, as we're moving towards closing. But because probably a bulk of people that listen to this go, well, that's fine. I live in the country. But man, oh man, it isn't like there's all kinds of opportunities in the country for sure. I mean, your area is not heavily populated, so they didn't even have the opportunities. I mean, they could have driven into other towns to find a job, but right there in their area. But anyways, speak into that if you would, please.
Sure. Um, I would say one of the things that a lot of folks in the country do is encourage their children to move away. You don't want to live here. There's nothing for you here. You need to go to college and get out of this area. We have tried to really fight that, and say, no, there is work here. There are things that you can do here. People live here. You can live here too. And really just encourage that, so that we have a covenant community that's going to be generational, and grow together as a body of believers, as a not just our family, but as our congregation, and grow together, work together, laugh together, cry together, and be that covenant community, and love each other. Even in the midst of our sins, we can still love each other and forgive one another. So that's really the heart of what our vision is and has been, for a long time. So you can have that in the city too. So if you're talking about work, the cities have work. A more there's way more opportunities. So the problem is that we have forgotten how to work with our hands. We have forgotten what hard work does. And so, like, for instance, you hear all the time, we need all the people coming in from foreign countries to come across our borders because they're doing the jobs that Americans don't want to do. Well, why don't Americans want to do those jobs? That's the question. We all did those jobs. I'm sure you did jobs that you didn't like so much when you were a young kid back in the 50s and 60s, Bill. And so, it some of the first jobs that I had were not glamorous jobs. There were jobs that maybe I didn't want to do, but I knew it needed to be done, and I did it. So that would be jobs like detasseling corn, which is one of the very tough job, very rough job for a young 13-year-old boy. Scraping hog pens down, and you had 1,000 hogs, and you got to scrape their hog pens down and scrape the manure out each day. And you walk. Sometimes you fall in it. Sometimes you get stuff splashed on you. You walk out of the hog barn after 2 hours of scraping, and you smell really bad. But you do it, because that's what we need to do. We've been called to work with the sweat of our brow, and that's part of the curse, but that's also part of the blessing, that God has given us work that we can do and provide for our families. What a blessing that is. And so we should have calluses on our hands. We should know what it's like to sweat and have an achy back and do some of those things. So there are plenty of jobs that you can get in, and we have bought. I really think we have bought the lie, that a college education is the most important thing for a young person to do. And many kids go off to college, and like you said at the beginning, have lost their way. And I'm just pulling these facts off the top of my head, so somebody can fact check me on it. But it's somewhere around 80% or 85% of Christian kids that go to college, and that's any college, whether that's Christian or secular college, will lose their way, or abandon the faith, within the first couple of years of going to college. It's a system that's not working right now, and probably has never really worked that well. It's not. It takes people out of reality, a lot of times. And here I sit as a college educated person with 2 master's degrees. I know you're in the same boat, Bill. But there are far better ways to earn a living, and sometimes, and a lot of times, most of the time, you can actually earn a lot better living, being working in trades and those types of work, blue collar work, as opposed to the white collar jobs. So that's my exposition on work. God calls us to work with our hands, and to do work heartily unto the Lord, no matter what we're doing. And again, I'm not saying that you can't have an office job and work heartily unto the Lord as well. So all of those, I'm not dissing any of those. And if that's what God's calling you to, then by all means, go into whatever work God's calling you to, and the talents that He's given to you, and the equipping that He's given to you. But don't feel like you're forced into those types of jobs either. There are plenty of other ways of going about earning a living to be able to provide for your family.
Jeff, thanks very much. I am so pleased that we had you on. The background you gave to us, and the counsel at the very end, I think is very powerful and very worthwhile. I have no doubt that there would be an individual or individuals that might like to look to you for some further words and counsel. Is there some a phone number or an email that you would provide for our listeners in case they want to find out more through you?
Sure. Best email that you could probably get in touch with me is Jeff, Jeff, the letter N, and Kelly. So Jeff and Kelly, Kelle. So Jeff, Jeff, the letter N, Kelle at protonmail.com. And that'd probably be the best way. I'm a little easier to get in touch with via email. So I can check that, on my own time, and then get back with somebody.
Jeff, undoubtedly there'll be some in the greater Muskegon and the greater Hesperia and Whitehall, no, maybe not Whitehall, yeah, Whitehall too, area that might be interested in checking you out and coming to your church. So give the name of your church and the address, please.
Sure, it's Christ the King Presbyterian Church, and we are in the downtown area of Ferry. So our address is 2205 Main Street, Shelby, Michigan. But that's a little deceiving because Main Street is not actually in Shelby, it's in Ferry. So we are 8 miles to the east of Shelby, just north of Highway 20, not far off of 132nd, right between New Era and Hesperia. So we're out in the rural area. We have a little country church that's an old United Methodist church, and that we were able to purchase in 2020. And that's where we are. So we're halfway between New Era and Hesperia. And we also have a website. It's called, let's see, I should have had that more up. I think it's Christ the King, MI, like Michigan, ChristTheKingMI.org. So, and you can Google our church as well. It's on Google. So Christ the King Church. And it'll show you a picture of a white church with a red roof, and you got the right church. So.
Jeff Swanson, thank you so very much for being a part of us with us today. You've been listening to Finally a Decent Podcast, and this has been a wonderful time with somebody that is a very decent human being. More importantly than that, he is a very fine Christian brother serving the greater West Michigan area for sure. His congregation and an inspiration to many of us, including his fellow board members with American Decency Association.